A hotel window blew inward 3 floors up, glass falling like rain over a parking lot, and the room it had shattered was the room their bags were in. The room they weren't in, the car was already moving. He didn't flinch. That was the strange part. A man who owned half the restaurants in Boston, watching a window die above his head, and his hands stayed still in his coat pockets. Beside him, a woman held a cracked old cookbook flat against her knees like it was the only solid thing left in the world. 8 days ago, she'd been a stranger, a waitress. She'd answered him in a language she had no reason to speak, said 5 quiet words about a recipe no living person was supposed to know. It changes everything, she'd told him. She had no idea how right she was. Now someone in his own house was reporting every city they touched, and the phone in his pocket buzzed with 3 words. Mancini had not planned to come in today. He had a lawyer waiting. 2 calls he'd been avoiding for 3 days. A meeting tonight that would determine whether a distribution arrangement in Providence continued to exist in its current form. He was not a man who dropped in on his own restaurants, and yet here he was. Standing on the sidewalk outside Caruso's on Newbury Street at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning in October, hands in his coat pockets. Looking at the door like it had personally offended him, the complaints had started in August, quietly. The way serious problems always start, not with noise, with silence. A review here, a comment there, a source inside the kitchen who mentioned, almost apologetically, that the numbers weren't adding up the way they should. 3 managers in 4 months. Staff turnover that made no sense on paper. Food costs drifting upward in ways that didn't match the menu prices. A restaurant bleeding money looks exactly like a healthy restaurant, until the day it doesn't. Until you're standing on a sidewalk in October, looking at a door, and wondering how something you built with your own hands got so far away from you without you noticing. Cole pushed the door open. The lunch crowd hit him first. The noise of it. Plates, voices overlapping. A child at a table near the window who had apparently decided that screaming was the most efficient form of communication available to her. 2 waitstaff moving too slowly. 1 table near the back flagging for attention that nobody was giving them. He found a corner table. Sat down. Kept the coat on, picked up the menu he'd read 100 times and looked at it without seeing it. And watched. Because watching was what he did. Always had. His father had taught him that. Dominic Mancini used to say that the man who speaks first in any room is the man who understands it least. Cole had taken that lesson and carried it further than his father probably intended. He didn't just watch rooms. He watched people inside rooms. The way they moved. The way they didn't move. The small adjustments people made when they thought nobody was paying attention. He was always paying attention, so he saw her immediately, the woman at table 4. She was handling 3 things simultaneously, a bread basket balanced in the crook of her left arm, 2 entrees on her right, and a conversation with the man at the table that was not, by any definition Cole had ever used, a conversation. The man was mid-50s, the kind of mid-50s that comes with a good tailor and a deeply ingrained belief that money is the same thing as importance. Expensive watch, cufflinks. The permanent expression of someone who had been told he was exceptional at a very young age and had never been meaningfully corrected since. He was leaning forward, speaking in the particular tone that certain men use when they've decided that a public setting is the appropriate venue for demonstrating their dominance over someone who cannot afford to respond. Low enough that the tables nearby couldn't quite make out the words. Loud enough that the woman at table 4 could hear every syllable with perfect clarity. Cole watched her. She was not what you'd call small. Dark hair pulled back in the practical way of someone who spends long shifts on her feet and has stopped making concessions to aesthetics during work hours. Uniform that fit the way. Uniforms fit when they're ordered from a catalog that assumes one body type and then distributed to people who have different ones. She was setting the plates down with the careful precision of someone who had learned, through long experience, that objects at least behaved predictably. That a plate would stay where you put it. That bread would stay in a basket. That the physical world, unlike the human one, could be managed through attention and care. The man spoke again. Louder this time, something about the order being wrong, something about how long it had taken, and then, because some men feel the need to complete the full performance, a comment about her appearance. delivered with the satisfied expression of someone who considers casual cruelty a form of wit. Cole's man Dex, seated 2 tables over with his coffee and his careful silence, glanced across at Cole. Cole gave him nothing. He was still watching the waitress. She didn't flinch, didn't redden, didn't do the thing where the chin drops slightly and the eyes go somewhere safe and internal and far away. She set the last plate down with the same precision she'd used for the others. Straightened, looked at the man with an expression so completely neutral it was almost architectural. The expression of a building, solid, unmoved. Not engaged in the weather happening around it. "I'll have that corrected for you, sir." Turned. Walked away. The man watched her go with the expression of someone disappointed by the inadequacy of the reaction. He'd wanted tears, probably, or visible distress, something that confirmed his power over the situation. He picked up his fork instead. Cole looked back at his menu. Mild, he thought. Genuinely mild. Not performed composure, not strategy. Just a person who had decided, somewhere along the road of whatever life had handed her, that other people's ugliness was not her problem to absorb. That she could let it pass through without letting it land. He hadn't seen that in a while. He turned the page of the menu. And then, because Cole Mancini was 42 years old and had spent 25 of those years developing habits that served him in certain rooms and failed him in others, he made a mistake. She passed his table. He lowered the menu and spoke. The Italian came naturally. It always did, not classroom Italian. Not the careful, aspirated Italian of language tapes and university courses, the kind that lived at the back of the throat. That came from his grandmother's kitchen in the North End, and from rooms he'd sat in as a teenager, where serious men said serious things in low voices, and nobody translated anything for the benefit of the young. Guarda questa. Scammetto che mangia più di quanto guadagna. Look at this one. I'd bet she eats more than she earns. Dex, to his considerable credit, managed not to react. He turned slightly toward the wall, examined the wallpaper with sudden, intense interest. The waitress stopped walking. Cole was already looking back at his menu. Already thinking about the meeting tonight. Already mentally 3 moves ahead of this moment. The way he was always mentally 3 moves ahead of every moment, which was why he was so completely unprepared for what happened next. She turned around, not fast, not with the sharp pivot of anger or offense. The way a person turns when they have made a decision. Deliberate, unhurried. The way you turn when you already know exactly what you're going to say and you're simply giving yourself the extra 2 seconds to be certain you want to say it. She looked at him, brown eyes. Completely. Infuriatingly. Calm. And then she answered him in Italian, not a word of it textbook. Not a syllable of it approximated or guessed at. The real thing. The rhythm was right. The music was right. The specific weight that Italian places on certain vowels. The way the language leans into itself with a kind of warmth that English doesn't quite have. All of it. Exact. The Italian of someone who had learned it from a person who loved it and had passed that love along intact, force. Ma almeno so come si trattano le persone. Sembra che tu non l'abbia mai imparato. Perhaps. But at least I know how to treat people. It seems you never learned. The table went silent. The noise of the restaurant continued around them. Plates. Voices. The child by the window had escalated to a different grievance, but at this particular corner of the room, at this specific table, something had stopped. Like a clock someone had reached up and held, Dex was looking at the ceiling with extreme focus. Cole stared at her. She held the look. No apology in it. No fear. No tremor that would have told him she understood exactly who she had just spoken to and was reconsidering the wisdom of having done so. Just waiting. The way a person waits when they've said their piece and have genuinely nowhere urgent to be. Then she tilted her head. A fraction. The smallest possible adjustment. "You look like you haven't eaten," she said. In English now. Completely ordinary English. The tone of a professional doing her job. "Can I recommend something?" Cole said nothing because Cole Mancini, who always had something to say, currently had nothing. "The tagliatelle is very good today," she continued. Tucking her notepad under her arm like this was a routine interaction. Like she was a normal person having a normal exchange with a normal customer who had not just insulted her in a foreign language 30 seconds ago. But if you want something that stays with you, ask the kitchen for the pasta with the slow butter sauce. They don't put it on the menu. You have to know to ask. She paused. One beat. Tell them to add a pinch of dried calendula to the cream. Most people skip it, another beat. It changes everything. She walked away. Cole didn't move. His mind had gone somewhere he hadn't meant to go. Somewhere cold and exact. 25 years back. A kitchen that no longer existed in the form he remembered it. A woman who no longer existed, or so he'd spent 25 years being told. A Sunday morning. His mother standing at the stove with her back to him, talking in the distracted way she talked when she was cooking, half to him. Half to the sauce in the pan. Half to some private conversation she was having with herself about flavors and timing and the particular alchemy of a recipe that had taken her years to get exactly right. He was 17. Doing nothing in particular at the kitchen table. Not listening, really. The way teenagers don't listen to things that will matter later. Tell them to add a pinch of dried calendula to the cream. It changes everything. Those words, those exact words, his mother's words, his mother's rhythm. His mother's particular way of landing on the last 3 syllables, like she was setting something fragile down on a shelf. Ida Mancini had vanished in the spring of 1999. No body, no note. No explanation that held together under examination for longer than 5 minutes. Cole had been 17. The men around him had offered versions of the story that shifted over the years in ways he'd learned not to examine too closely. And he had buried the questions. Under work, under years, under the specific discipline of a man who has decided that some doors are better left closed because he doesn't know yet what's behind them and he isn't ready to find out. A pinch of dried calendula, it changes everything. Cole set the menu down, very slowly. With the careful movements of someone handling something that might, if jostled, shatter. He looked at Dex. "Find out her name," he said. Quiet. Level. The voice he used when something mattered and he didn't want it visible. Her full name. Where she lives. How long she's worked here. Dex blinked. The waitress. The waitress. Cole stood, straightened his jacket. Folded the menu along its crease and placed it precisely at the edge of the table. He walked out without ordering anything. Behind him, the restaurant carried on. Ordinary and loud and completely unaware that something had just cracked open in the corner booth. Something that had been sealed for 25 years. Cole Mancini was very good at keeping things sealed. He could already feel this one wasn't going back. Her name was Nora Hayes. Dex had it within 2 hours. 28 years old. Born in Boston General. 3rd of November, 1996. Parents deceased, both of them, when she was 4 years old. Raised by a woman named June Calloway from the age of 4 until she was 12. June had died of a cardiac event in the winter of 2007 and left behind a modest savings account, a 1-bedroom apartment in Jamaica Plain that Nora could not afford to keep on a 12-year-old's behalf, and a cookbook she'd been at Caruso's 14 months. Before that, 2 other restaurants in the Fenway area. Before that, 3 years at a diner in Somerville that closed when the owner retired, and his children discovered they had no interest in running a diner in Somerville, no record, no complications, no obvious connection to anyone in Cole's world, no flags, no reasons for concern. Which should have made him feel better, it didn't. He stood in the window of his office on the 8th floor of a building in the financial district that afternoon. The harbor stretched out below him, gray and wide and doing what it always did, moving. Regardless of what was happening on the shore, he thought about a recipe that no living person on Earth was supposed to know. His mother had invented it. She'd said so herself, the only time she'd ever shown him how to make it. That Sunday morning in 1994, when Cole was 12 years old and had no particular interest in cooking and was sitting at the kitchen table, only because it was cold outside and warm in the kitchen, and the alternative was his homework. She'd told him she'd built it piece by piece, over years, adjusting and refining until it was exactly what she wanted it to be. That the calendula was the ingredient nobody would think to add, that most people would leave it out because it seemed unnecessary and faintly strange. That was the point, she'd said. The things that seem unnecessary, those are usually the things that matter most. He had not thought about that morning in a very long time. He put on his coat at 7:15 that evening and told Dex to drive. The building was on a quiet street in Jamaica Plain where the trees had given up their October leaves and the streetlights were working harder than usual to compensate. 4 stories. No doorman. A panel of mailboxes inside the entrance with handwritten name labels. The kind of detail that tells you everything about a building. Clean but not wealthy. Maintained but not easy. the home of people who work hard and have learned that comfort is something you carry with you, because the walls don't always provide it. Nora's name was on the third-floor mailbox, written in a careful, even hand. The kind of person who labels things properly because she has learned that small orders matter when everything else is uncertain. Cole went up without a plan. This was unusual for him. He was a man who operated on plans, who understood that the absence of a plan was not freedom but exposure, who had sat in enough rooms where improvisation had gone badly to know exactly what it cost, and yet here he was. Third-floor landing, a door. No prepared reason for being there. No script, no angle. He knocked. The woman who opened the door was not who he'd expected, which was strange, because she was exactly the same person he'd watched in the restaurant 3 hours ago. Same face. Same dark hair, down now instead of pulled back. Same brown eyes. But different, because in the restaurant she'd been in her element. Controlled environment, known variables, the professional composure of someone who had learned to operate within a specific set of rules. Here she was in her own space, and her own space told him things the restaurant hadn't. She opened the door with the measured confidence of someone who had checked the peephole and made a deliberate decision. Not caution, not naivety, considered. Intentional. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Mr. Mancini," she said, "you know who I am. Everyone who works in your restaurant knows who you are." Not an accusation. A statement of fact, delivered the same way she delivered his mother's recipe. Calmly. Without loading it with anything it didn't need. "What do you want?" "To talk about the recipe." A pause. The precise length of a breath. She opened the door wider. The apartment was small, but it didn't feel small. Books on every surface that had a surface to offer. A cat asleep on the windowsill, with the absolute authority of an animal that has settled the question of ownership entirely in its own favor and does not anticipate appeal. A lamp in the corner throwing warm yellow light over everything. The smell of something that had been cooked earlier. Garlic, maybe. Something with herbs. Something that had been made with attention, and at the small kitchen table, with a bowl of soup and a neatly folded newspaper, and the profoundly unhurried posture of a man who had been expecting exactly this kind of interruption and had decided in advance not to be bothered by it. An old man, white hair. Careful eyes that moved to Cole and stayed there without aggression or welcome. The specific stillness of someone who has lived long enough to understand that most alarming situations resolve themselves if you give them enough room. "My grandfather," Nora said. "George." George Hayes looked at Cole with the patience of a man who has spent decades reading people and has become very accurate at it. He nodded once, returned to his soup. Clearly decided that whatever was unfolding here was Nora's situation to manage, and that she was capable of managing it. Cole respected that. Deeply. He sat at the kitchen table, uninvited. Nora didn't object. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down and looked at him with the same directness she'd used in the restaurant. No performance of either friendliness or hostility. Just attention, the calendula, Cole said. "Where did you learn to say it that way? What way? That way?" That exact phrasing. The pause before the last part. "Where did you learn it?" Nora looked at him, not defensively. Thinking. The way someone thinks when they're deciding not how to frame an answer, but whether the question deserves the real one. "June," she said finally. "The woman who raised me. She taught me the recipe. Said it had been given to her by someone she'd known a long time ago. Someone she loved very much, a beat. She never told me who." Cole looked at the table. George had stopped pretending to read the newspaper. June kept a cookbook. Cole said, "Yes, I'd like to see it." 3 seconds of silence. The cat shifted on the windowsill. George folded the newspaper corner down by a deliberate inch. Then Nora stood, walked to the bedroom, came back carrying a book old. The spine cracked and repaired with tape. Repaired carefully, the way someone repairs something they intend to keep. The cover water-stained at the lower corner. The pages swollen with years of kitchen steam and use, and the specific warmth of a cookbook that has been cooked from, not just consulted. She set it on the table in front of him. Cole looked at it without touching it yet. "June taught you Italian," he said. "From the time I was about 6. She said it was important." "Did she say why?" "She said some things are worth knowing even before you understand why you need them." Nora paused. "I thought she just liked the language. I thought it was just something she enjoyed passing on." Cole put his hand on the cover of the cookbook. Felt the texture of it. The slight warp in the spine from years of steam and handling. He opened it. The pages were dense. Not just recipes. The margins were full. Additions, corrections, the running commentary of someone who had been in conversation with this book for years. Observations about what worked and what didn't. Notes that had nothing to do with cooking. A phone number without a name attached. What might have been the beginning of a letter, abandoned after 3 lines. A word in a language Cole couldn't immediately place. He turned pages carefully, looking for something he couldn't name precisely. A shape, a familiar lean to certain letters, a particular way of forming an A that he'd seen on report cards and birthday cards, and a note left on a refrigerator one morning in 1999. The pages near the back had stuck slightly together. Old flour, maybe, or time. The residue of a kitchen that had been used with love and frequency. He separated them slowly, and a photograph slid out and landed on the table between them, small. Square-edged in the way of photographs, from before digital cameras made everything precise and corrected and identical. Slightly faded at the center. The colors doing what 90s photographs do, the reds pulling warm, the blues going gray, the whole image taking on the quality of something seen through a particular kind of afternoon light. 2 women standing outside a restaurant. Small place. Warm light in the windows, a street sign at the very edge of the frame, barely readable. The kind of restaurant that exists in the American South, low ceilings, a screen door, the particular welcome of a place that has fed people well for a long time and knows it. One woman he didn't recognize. Older, a kind face. Her arm around the other woman's shoulder in the easy way of people who have been through things together. The other woman, Cole, would have known her anywhere. In any photograph. In any condition. Burned down to its last corner, he would have known her. His mother, Ida Mancini, 25 years younger, thinner than he remembered. But the line of her jaw was exact. The way she held her shoulders, pulled back slightly, a habit she'd had since he was a child. The posture of a woman who had decided early that the world treated people better when they took up space with intention. And she was smiling, not the smile she'd used in Boston. Not the careful, warm, watchful smile of photographs taken at family events where she was always slightly aware of who else was in the room. This was something different. This smile was given freely, without calculation. The smile of a woman who was not, in this specific moment, watching any doors. Cole's hand went flat on the table. Nora was watching him. "You know her," she said. Not a question. She could see it in his face, and she wasn't going to pretend she couldn't. He turned the photograph over, on the back, in handwriting he didn't recognize. Not his mother's handwriting, someone else's. 4 words and a city, Savannah. "Come find us." The kitchen was very quiet. George had set his spoon down. Cole looked up at Nora. "How long have you had this?" "My whole life." June kept it inside the book. "I've looked at it hundreds of times." She paused. "I never knew who they were." Cole looked at the photograph again, at his mother's face, at the light in the restaurant window behind her, at the street sign at the edge of the frame that he couldn't quite read from this angle. He thought about 17 years old, and a Sunday morning, and a recipe being written into him without his understanding that it was happening, without his knowing that it was the kind of thing that would matter. The kind of thing that would, 25 years later, in a corner booth in his own restaurant, reach across a room and change the direction of everything. He put the photograph down. Looked at Nora. "Pack a bag," he said. Nora looked at him. Then at George. George picked up his spoon, looked at his soup, then slowly and deliberately at Cole. The examination of a man who has been alive long enough to read people the way other people read weather. Not just the surface, but the system underneath. What's moving? What's building? What's about to arrive? He nodded once, not a large nod. The smallest possible version. But permission, clearly. Nora stood up. She didn't ask where exactly. Didn't ask for how long. Didn't ask what she was walking into. She went to the bedroom, and Cole heard drawers opening and closing with the practical efficiency of someone who has learned not to overthink the question of what to bring when you don't know what you're going toward. The cat on the windowsill opened one eye, assessed the situation, went back to sleep. George picked up his newspaper, refolded it along a different crease. "She'll need the cookbook," he said, without looking up. Cole looked at the book still open on the table. "I know. She won't leave without it. I know." George unfolded the newspaper again, looked at the page without reading it. Then looked at Cole with the direct, unhurried attention of a man who has decided to say something and is to say it regardless. "You look like your father," he said. Cole said nothing. "But your eyes are different." George turned the newspaper over. His eyes never worried about being wrong. A pause. "Yours do." He turned to the sports section. Cole sat with that. Dex was waiting on the sidewalk with both hands in his jacket pockets and the expression of a man who had learned, through extensive professional experience, that the most useful thing he could do in situations he didn't fully understand was to stay in one place and not ask questions until questions were explicitly invited. Nora came out of the building 7 minutes later, one bag, sensibly sized. The cookbook under her arm like it was a natural extension of her body rather than an object she was carrying. She looked at Dex, looked at Cole, looked at the car in a way that communicated she was doing math, and the math was coming out strange. "Where are we going?" she said. "Savannah. That's 12 hours. "Approximately, yes. Tonight, yes." She looked at him with an expression that wasn't quite disbelief and wasn't quite resignation. The look of a person who has encountered an unexpected variable and is rapidly recalibrating without making a production of it. "I have a shift tomorrow," she said. "I own the restaurant." That, she stopped. Reconsidered. "That doesn't automatically make it less of a shift. You won't be fired. You can't know that. I do know that, actually." With complete certainty, she stood on the sidewalk. The October wind moved down the street and did what October wind in Boston does. Reminded everyone that it was in charge now, and summer was a memory. Dex looked at the middle distance with extraordinary patience. "This woman in the photograph," Nora said. "You recognize her. She's my mother. Your mother. Yes, who has been missing. 25 years. Nora absorbed this. The way she absorbed everything, not with visible drama, not with the performance of reaction, but with the particular stillness of someone actually processing rather than performing the processing, and the recipe, she said, was hers. She invented it. Nobody else was supposed to know it, and June had it. Yes. And I've been saying it to customers for 6 years. Apparently, she was quiet for a moment. Long enough that Dex shifted his weight almost imperceptibly and then stopped. "Mr. Mancini," she said. "Cole, she said at once. Testing the weight of it like a word she was deciding whether to add to her vocabulary. "Why are you taking me with you?" Specifically, he looked at her. "Because June had the recipe, and June raised you, and you are the thread I have to follow, because you're the only thread there is. Because you're connected to this in a way I don't understand yet, and the things I don't understand yet are the ones that have always mattered most. Because you answered me in Italian in a room full of people who have learned to be careful around me, and you didn't blink once, and whoever taught you to do that understood something about how to move through the world that I think I need to understand right now." He said, "You're the only lead I have." Nora looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she walked to the car and got in. They drove through the night. Dex took the wheel without discussion. Cole sat in the back. Nora sat across from him in the way that back seats create proximity, whether you've arranged for it or not. Close enough that he was aware of the specific quality of her silence, and it had a quality, that was the thing. Most silences were either aggressive or anxious, filled with the static of someone who needed the quiet to end. Nora's silence was neither, it was just silence. She looked out the window and occasionally at the cookbook in her lap, and she didn't fill the space with noise in order to manage it. Cole had not spent significant time in a car with someone who didn't feel the need to manage silence. He wasn't sure exactly what to do with it. "How good is your Italian?" he said. "Somewhere around New Haven. Good enough, June taught you, from 6 to 12. Then I kept going on my own. Library tapes. Then community college courses when I could manage the schedule." She paused. "June used to receive letters, in Italian. She never read them to me. But I could see the language and I wanted to understand what it said. Did you ever find out?" "No. She kept them somewhere I never located. A beat. When she died, I looked. They were gone." Cole looked at the highway lights moving past. She was careful, Nora said. Not with bitterness. With the tone of a conclusion drawn from long reflection. The tone of someone who has turned a fact over in their hands for years and has finally decided what it means. "People who are careful about letters," Cole said, "usually have a reason," she finished. Dex turned the heat up a fraction without being asked. "The woman in the photograph with your mother," Nora said. "You don't recognize her either." "No, but the dress." is where the thread goes next. She looked at the cookbook, ran her thumb along the taped spine with a gesture that was so practiced it was clearly unconscious. Something she'd done 1,000 times. June carried this with her every day, she said quietly. Every single day. She cooked from it every Sunday. She treated it like it was. She searched for the word, alive. The way you treat something that has a person inside it. Cole understood that. He'd had a jacket of his mother's once. A dark wool coat she'd left hanging by the door. He'd kept it for years after she disappeared. Wore it sometimes when he was driving alone at night, not because it kept him warm. It was too small across the shoulders, but because it was the closest thing to a conversation he had left. He'd thrown it out at 31. On an unremarkable Tuesday in February. Not for any specific reason except that he'd woken up that morning and decided that some things needed to be put in the ground before they put you there instead. He was beginning to wonder if that had been a mistake. They stopped outside Philadelphia at 2 in the morning, at a place that served coffee around the clock and had developed a policy of not asking questions about the variety of people who needed that service. Decks filled the car. Cole stood outside in the cold with his phone and made 2 calls he'd been avoiding. Kept them short, said what was needed. Gave away nothing. Nora bought 3 coffees. Brought one to Dex without being asked or prompted. Cole noticed that. She came and stood near him on the sidewalk. Not next to him, 3 feet away, the distance of someone who respects an unmarked boundary without requiring that it be marked. She held her coffee with both hands. How old were you? She said. When she disappeared, 17. Old enough to know something was wrong, old enough to know. Not powerful enough to do anything about it. He looked at the highway. That's a particular kind of thing to carry. She nodded slowly. I was 4 when my parents died. I don't remember them. Not really. I have impressions. The smell of something. A sound from a distance, but not faces, not voices. She looked at her cup. June was the only parent I actually knew, and she's gone. Since I was 12, said it plainly. Not performing grief, not asking for anything, just placing a fact on the table between them for him to see. So I understand something about it, she said. The way someone just isn't there anymore. The way explanations get offered but they don't quite fit. The way you learn to stop pulling at the edges of the explanation because you're not sure what's underneath. Cole looked at her. The car accident, he said. That's what you were told about your parents. Yes, and you've started to wonder. I've wondered for a long time, she said. June was careful in ways that careful people aren't unless they have a reason. The letters, the Italian. The photograph she kept but never explained. She wrapped her hands more tightly around the cup. I stopped asking because she was gone before I was old enough to ask the right questions. And then there was nobody left to ask. The cold air moved between them. Cole thought about 25 years of explanations. The way they'd shifted. The way he'd trained himself not to notice the shifting. The way a man who is very good at watching other people can become very bad at watching himself if he decides, at 17, that watching himself is too dangerous. I don't know what Savannah will tell us, he said. But I think it's more than either of us is expecting. Nora looked at the dark highway stretching south. Then we should get there, she said. She handed him his coffee. Walked back to the car. Cole stood for one more moment on the asphalt. Thought about his mother's face in a photograph. Smiling the way she hadn't smiled in Boston. Standing outside a restaurant in a city she had no reason to be in. Not afraid, not watching the door. He got in the car. Dawn arrived somewhere in Virginia. Not all at once. The way dawn actually arrives, which is slowly and then with the sudden commitment of something that has made up its mind. The sky going gray at the edges, then gray-pink, then the flat, purposeful blue of a morning that had decided to be useful. Nora was asleep. She'd stayed awake past 4, reading the cookbook with a small clip on light. Turning the book sideways occasionally to read something written in the margins vertically, not telling Cole what she found. Eventually the light had clicked off, and she'd tilted against the window with the particular trust of someone who has learned to sleep when sleep is available, because it isn't always. Cole had watched the highway. He was good at being awake. It came with the life he'd chosen. Rooms where staying sharp was a form of survival. Meetings that ran until 2 in the morning and resumed at 7. The specific alertness of a man who'd learned in his 20s that full relaxation was a luxury that presented itself infrequently and should not be trusted when it did. 19 hours without sleep, and he didn't feel it yet. He looked at the cookbook on Nora's lap, the way her hand rested on it even in sleep, like even unconscious she was keeping track of it. He thought about June, about a woman he'd never met who had carried this book every day for years and taught a child Italian and received letters she kept hidden and raised someone with enough quiet strength to answer a man like Cole Mancini in his own language, without blinking. His mother had chosen June deliberately, specifically. Not out of desperation, but out of knowledge. The thread had been there the whole time. 25 years of it. Patient. Waiting for someone to pick up the right end. He just hadn't known which end that was. Savannah arrived, the way southern cities arrive, gradually and then all at once. And then the air is different before you've quite registered that the landscape has changed. That particular quality that southern air has, even through car windows, heavier, softer, carrying something old and green underneath everything else. Dex found the street. Parked. The address from the back of the photograph was a block off the main square. Narrow street. The buildings on either side, the particular aged gold of old brick that has absorbed a century of southern light and arrived at something beautiful without having planned for it. Ironwork balconies. Shutters faded to a color that had once been a decisive choice and had gradually become something more philosophical. The restaurant was gone. Of course it was, but the building was the same. Cole held the photograph up and matched the angles. Same door frame proportions, same window arrangement, same particular lean to the structure, as if the whole building had been listening to one side of a long conversation and had tilted slightly toward it over the decades. A tourist shop inside now. Objects that give people something to carry home so that the place becomes a souvenir instead of a memory. She was here, Nora said. She was here, and now she's not. So we find out where she went next, Cole said. The building's been here for over a century. Someone will remember who ran the restaurant. Dex had already gotten out of the car and was looking up the block with the systematic focus of a man identifying resources. He caught Cole's eye. Nodded once toward a hardware store on the corner, where an older man in his 70s was unlocking the front gate with the unhurried movements of someone who has been doing the same thing at the same time every day for 30 years. Start there. Cole said it took most of the morning. The hardware store owner knew someone who'd known the restaurant's previous owner. The previous owner had sold the building 12 years ago to a property management company and moved to Florida, but his sister was still in Savannah. The sister knew a woman named Odette Beaumont who had worked the kitchen there for 20 years. Chef Odette Beaumont. She lived 6 blocks away in a house painted the precise yellow of something that has spent decades in the sun and has decided to commit to the relationship rather than resist it. She opened the door before they knocked, stood in the frame in a cooking apron, 72 years old, moving with the easy authority of a woman who made peace with gravity a long time ago and has been on good terms with it since. She looked at Cole, then at Nora, then back at Cole with the attention of someone doing a specific kind of math. You're from the north, she said. Boston, I hear it. She looked at the photograph Cole was holding out. Less than 3 seconds. Rose and Anna, she said. Lord have mercy. Come inside, I'll make coffee. Rose and Anna, 2 names, not 1. Cole filed that immediately. He followed her, in Odette talk the way people talk when they've been holding a story for a very long time and have finally, in this specific moment, found the right person to put it down for. She talked while the coffee brewed, kept talking while she poured, sat at her kitchen table, old wood, scarred from decades of meals and elbows and everything that happens in a working kitchen, and talked without rushing or editing or asking why they were there. She knew why they were there. The way certain people know things without being told. The woman called Anna had arrived first. Summer of 1999, small bag. A bruise along her jaw she mentioned once and never spoke of again. She'd taken a job in the kitchen. Good hands, Odette said, serious about the work. Paid her room 3 months ahead in cash every time. Sat with her back to the wall in every room she entered. I didn't ask questions, Odette said. In my kitchen I never asked. People come to Savannah to become somebody different. It's practically written into the founding documents. The second woman, Rose, came 2 weeks later. The older woman from the photograph, kind-faced, arriving quietly. The 2 of them rented a room together above a hardware store, 2 streets over, and kept to themselves in the way of people who have agreed that the keeping is necessary. She worked my station for almost 2 years, Odette said. Best kitchen hand I've had in 60 years of kitchens, and I have had kitchens, so understand what that means. Cole leaned forward. Did she ever say anything about where she'd come from? Odette turned her coffee cup in its saucer. She talked about her son sometimes, she said. Never by name, just my son. Said she hoped he was becoming a better man than the world around him was teaching him to be. A pause. She said it the way you say something that costs you a little every time. Cole set his cup down, the ceiling fan turned overhead. Slow, patient. Nora was looking at the table. Odette slid a folder across. Employment records, kitchen rosters, going back 30 years. The archive of a woman who had decided that forgetting was a form of carelessness she couldn't afford. Nora opened it, ran her finger down a staffing list from February 2000, stopped. A signature, Anna Reeves. Cole looked at it. The loop at the top of every A. The R that leaned slightly right, as if the pen was in a hurry to get to whatever came next. He had grown up reading his mother's handwriting. Notes in his lunchbox, cards on his birthday. The letter on the refrigerator that last morning in 1999 saying she'd stepped out and would be back before dinner. She had not been back before dinner, but the handwriting was the same. Exactly the same. He breathed in once, breathed out. She left quickly, Odette said, watching him carefully now. One morning she just didn't come in. Rose came alone for their things. Said Anna had to go. Did Rose say why? Odette looked at the garden outside her kitchen window. She maintained it with the focused attention of someone who has learned that things die if you don't tend them daily. I asked, she said. Rose looked at the door before she answered. Like she was checking it, a pause. She said they'd found her again. The kitchen was completely still. Cole looked at the words in his mother's handwriting. Anna Reeves. A name worn like a coat over a real one. They'd found her again, which meant someone had been looking. Which meant the disappearance of Ida Mancini from Boston in the spring of 1999 was not what he'd spent 25 years being told it was. Not loss, not the kind of inexplicable thing that happens to families sometimes. Not accident, not choice. Someone had known where she was, and she had run before they could reach her. He folded the employment record, slid it back to Odette. Thank you, he said. Odette nodded once. The nod of a woman who has done the right thing and is at peace with that and doesn't need to elaborate. They walked out into the savannah afternoon, the sun doing what southern sun does. Staying warmer longer than you expect, committed to the day in a way that northern sun rarely bothers with. Spanish moss moving in the light wind, music from somewhere a block over. Something slow and certain. Cole stood on the sidewalk, Nora stood beside him. Close enough that he was aware of her. That 3-foot space, she maintained. Respectful without being pointed about it. They'd found her again. Nora said, yes, which means someone was looking. The whole time, yes, who? Cole thought about his Uncle Frank. 71 years old, came to Sunday dinners, sat at the head of the table when Cole was traveling. 40 years inside the family. Never once in all that time, giving anyone a reason to look at him differently than they always had. I have a name, Cole said. I'm not ready to say it yet. Nora looked at him. Because saying it out loud makes it real, he didn't answer. Which was an answer. Okay, she said. What's the next thread? Memphis. There's someone there who saw something in 1999. Who's been living quietly with it ever since. Nora nodded once, then Memphis, she said. She walked to the car. Cole stood one moment longer. Thought about his mother in a kitchen in this city, her back to the wall, smiling in a photograph like someone who had gotten, for a little while, to stop being afraid. He was going to find her. He didn't know yet what that would cost. He got in the car. Memphis arrived the way bad news arrives, gradually, then all at once, the city rising out of the flat Mississippi landscape like something that had been pressed up from underground rather than constructed from above. Low skyline, wide river, the particular gray-brown of a place that has absorbed a century of hard living and decided to wear it honestly rather than paint over it. Cole had been to Memphis twice before, both times for work. Both times he'd left within 24 hours. He didn't have warm feelings about Memphis. Memphis didn't seem to require them. They checked into a hotel near the river. 2 rooms. Dex took the room at the end of the hall with the sight line to the elevator, because that was how Dex approached unfamiliar buildings, and Cole had long since stopped explaining the logic to people who asked. Nora took the middle room without comment. Cole took the one nearest the stairs. Old habits. He stood at the window that evening and looked at the Mississippi. Gray and wide and moving with the unhurried certainty of something that has been doing this particular thing for longer than anyone watching, has been alive and has no intention of stopping. He thought about Walter Briggs, 66 years old, retired, living in East Memphis in a house that Dex had located that afternoon through the specific combination of public records and patience that Dex applied to most problems. Former courier, mid-level, the kind of man who moved things between people who couldn't be seen moving those things themselves. Who knew enough to be useful and not enough, theoretically, to be dangerous. Except, in the spring of 1999, Walter Briggs had seen something he wasn't supposed to see, and Ida Mancini had gone to him before she disappeared. Which meant Walter Briggs had been living with a secret for 25 years. Cole understood that kind of living. The specific weight of something you've decided is safer to keep than to release. How it shapes the way you move through rooms. How you start assessing exits without realizing you're doing it. How you sleep differently than people who don't carry things, and you've stopped trying to explain why. He understood it because he'd been doing a version of it himself. He was done. Walter Briggs opened his door on a Wednesday morning wearing a veteran's cap and the expression of a man who has spent 25 years waiting for something unpleasant, and has arrived, finally, at a state of acceptance about its arrival. He looked at Cole's face, went slightly pale, the color shifting the way it shifts when the body recognizes something before the mind has processed it. "You're Vincent's boy," he said. Cole kept his voice level. "Dominic's." Walter blinked. Recalibrated, something reorganizing behind his eyes. "Right, yes, Dominic, you have his." He stepped back from the door. The movement of a man who has done the math and determined that having the door open is marginally better than having it closed. "Come in, then." The house was neat with the neatness of a man who lives alone and has decided that order is the one remaining thing he can control completely. Military neatness. Everything parallel. Everything assigned. Framed photographs on the wall. A younger Walter in uniform. A woman who was presumably a wife. Children. The documentary evidence of a life that had continued in its ordinary dimensions, while something extraordinary sat underneath it. Walter didn't sit. He stood in his own hallway, like sitting down would grant the conversation more reality than he could manage. Cole didn't sit either. Nora stood near the door, with her hands in her jacket pockets, and said nothing. She had a quality in rooms like this, rooms where other people needed to do the talking, of becoming very still in a way that was present rather than absent. Like a room being used for something quiet and serious. "Tell me about 1999, Cole said. Walter looked at the floor. "How much do you know? Enough to be here." "Not enough to leave," Walter exhaled, long. The exhale of a man releasing something he's been holding in his chest for a very long time. 30 years I worked as a courier," he said, "between your family's operation and a group out of Nashville. Cutler's people, not enemies exactly. More like neighbors you have a standing agreement with. Everybody knows the terms. Nobody writes them down." Cole nodded. "I delivered things," Walter said. "Didn't ask what was in them. Didn't look. That was the job and I was good at it." He paused. "But one delivery in the spring of 1999, the package wasn't sealed the way it should have been. And I looked. What was in it? Financial records. Transfers. Significant amounts. Moving from your family's accounts into Cutler's operation over a period of years. Not because Cutler's people had taken it," Walter looked up. "Because someone on your side was sending it?" The hallway was very quiet. "Someone with complete access," Cole said. "Complete access. Complete trust. The kind of access where nobody checks he's because nobody imagines they'd need to." The Cole thought about Frank. About 40 years of Sunday dinners. About the way Frank had stood closest to the coffin at Dominic Mancini's funeral. About the performance of grief that Cole had never examined, because you don't examine grief. Because grief is private. Because in families like his, private things stayed private and you didn't pull at the threads of them. "How did my mother find out?" he said. "She came to me." Walter moved to the wall. Put one hand flat against it, steadying something. Said she'd found something she wasn't supposed to find. The original document lesson. She didn't tell me how. Said she needed someone who'd seen the other side of the transaction to confirm what she was looking at. He looked at Cole. I confirmed it, and then she was gone. 3 days later, his jaw tightened, And the week after that, 2 men came to my apartment. Calm, very specific, about what would happen to me and to anyone I might decide to tell. The eyes of a man who has been carrying guilt about a calculation he made 25 years ago and knows it was the wrong calculation and has been knowing it ever since. I believe them, he said. I know, I had children, I know. Walter? The man's shoulders dropped a fraction. The physical result of being understood rather than condemned. She said a name, Cole said. Before she left your apartment, she told you who was behind it. Walter was silent for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. A car moved past on the quiet street outside. She said it like it cost her something, Walter said slowly. Like saying it made it real in a way she'd been trying not to let it be real. He paused. One final moment of a 25-year-old habit of self-preservation, then he let it go. She said Frank. Cole's jaw set, the name sat in the hallway between them. Took up space, Frank Mancini, 71 years old. His father's younger brother, the man who had sat at Dominic's right hand for 4 decades. Who had helped Cole build the organization after his father's death. Who had access to everything, because Dominic had believed, without ever questioning the belief, that access was something Frank had earned. He had earned it. For 20 years he had earned it. And then he had spent the next 20 years spending it on something else entirely. She was going to tell your father, Walter said. She'd made up her mind. She was going back to Boston. But Frank found out first. He looked at the floor. Men who have everything to lose don't wait to find out how things develop. Cole stood in Walter Briggs's hallway and looked at nothing in particular, 25 years of questions. Folded up, buried under work and discipline and the specific commitment of a man who had decided that the past was something that happened to other people, except it had been happening to him the whole time. He just hadn't been looking, thank you, Cole said. Walter looked up. What are you going to do? Cole thought about it. Honestly, the right thing. Probably for the first time in a while, he walked out. The car was warm. Dex had kept the engine running. Cole sat in the back and said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Nora sat across from him, not pressing, not filling the silence with anything it didn't require. Memphis moved past the windows. The city doing what it always does, absorbing everything without comment. All the history, all the weight, all the things that happened here that haven't been fully processed and might never be. A city that understands something about carrying things without putting them down. Cole understood that right now with his entire body. Frank, Nora said, not a question. Frank, Cole confirmed. Your uncle, my father's brother. My father trusted him completely. 40 years. He was at every meeting, every decision. He had access to everything because my father never once imagined he'd need to check. Cole looked out the window. He'd been loyal for 20 years before he wasn't. Which is why nobody checked. Which is why the whole thing worked for as long as it worked. What did he get out of it, Nora said. Money. Position with Cutler. Insurance against a future where my father wasn't there to protect him anymore. He paused. Power moves sideways when it can't move up. He was willing to let your mother run for her life, Nora said. For 25 years. For that, said plainly. No indictment in it. Just the fact, placed precisely on the table. He was willing to let her run until she stopped, Cole said. Or until someone found her. The river appeared between buildings. Wide. Gray. Going somewhere with total certainty about the direction. They kept looking, Nora said. That's what Odette meant. Found her again. Past tense, which means there was a before. Yes, she kept running. 25 years. Nora looked at the cookbook beside her, and June kept the book. Taught me the recipe. Never explained any of it. She turned the cover slowly in her hands. She was protecting the way back. If your mother ever wanted to be found by the right person, by me, by you. Through me, the car moved through Memphis toward the highway. One more stop before the next state. One more name. Cole thought about his father dying 8 years ago. Quietly. In his own bed. Cole had buried him with pride, had stood at the grave and felt grief that was real and uncomplicated and not mixed with anything else. Now, somewhere on a Memphis highway, he was beginning to understand that he had buried his father not knowing. That Dominic Mancini had spent the last 8 years of his life, possibly more, believing his wife had chosen to leave him. Had lived with that wound. Had let it shape him in ways Cole had seen and never understood. And Frank had been at every dinner, had stood closest to the coffin. Cole pressed his thumb hard against the door handle. Held it. Released Cole. Nora's voice. Quiet. Just his name. Yes, you okay? No, okay. That was it. No correction. No management. No attempt to move him somewhere more comfortable. Just acknowledgement that no was a real answer and didn't require immediate repair. He looked at her. She was watching the road ahead. 28 years old. She'd been 4 years old in 1999 when her parents died in circumstances he was beginning to suspect were not the circumstances she'd been told. Who had been raised by a woman his mother had chosen. Who had grown up with a cookbook and a language and the specific quiet dignity of someone who had been given, by the people around her, exactly the tools she needed. Without being told why she would need them. She didn't know yet everything he'd figured out. She was going to know soon. He wasn't ready to say it while moving. Father Doyle's church was at the end of a dirt road outside Savannah's outer limits, on land that seemed to operate under a different agreement with time than the rest of Georgia. Small, white painted. A hand-lettered sign at the entrance that had been repainted so many times you could see the history of the lettering underneath the current version like geological strata of a vegetable garden along the side. Tomato cages, still standing from the summer, the plants long gone, but the cages remaining like small architectural monuments to a season that had ended. A compost pile managed with obvious seriousness. The priest who opened the door was 79 years old. Moved with the slow, considered deliberateness of a body maintained through will rather than physical advantage. Father Doyle, small, slightly bent at the shoulders, but his eyes had refused to participate in the aging of the rest of him. Bright, specific, the eyes of someone whose attention, when it settled on you, was entirely present. He looked at the three of them, lingered on Cole's face with the specific attention of someone who had been expecting a particular face for a long time. I wondered how long, he said. Come in, I'll make tea. He made tea. The kind of man who has kept a secret for 20 years makes tea before the secret gets told. It's a kindness. It gives everyone's hands something to hold, while the difficult things get said. They sat in his small office. Books on every wall from floor to ceiling, organized in a system that was clearly personal and possibly not transferable. A single wooden cross above the desk, plain wood, no ornamentation. The room of a man who had stripped away everything that wasn't essential and found the essential to be quite sufficient. Father Doyle poured without hurrying. She came here in 2003, he said. The woman who called herself Anna. She'd been moving for 4 years by then. You could see it in everything she did. The way she assessed a room before she settled into it. The way she always knew where the exits were. He handed Cole a cup. She volunteered in the food pantry. She repainted the back rooms. She fixed the gutters, which nobody had offered to do in 20 years. A small pause. People who can't stay still find things to fix. It's a way of being useful to a place without making promises to it. How long did she stay, Cole said. 8 months. 9 perhaps. He looked at his own cup. She was carrying something very large. I didn't ask what. People come to churches with heavy things. That's rather the purpose of the building. The letters, Cole said. Father Doyle set down his tea. Rose from the chair with the careful economy of the very old, no movement wasted. Crossed to a cabinet in the corner, old wood with iron hinges, a lock he opened with a key he wore on a chain beneath his collar. Inside, a bundle of envelopes, tied with kitchen twine, aged but preserved. The careful preservation of something that had been expected to wait. He placed them on the desk between them. She said to hold them until someone came asking the right questions, he said. She told me the right questions would involve a recipe, a photograph, and a name. He looked at Cole steadily. She mentioned Mancini. Cole took the envelopes. His hands were not entirely steady. He noticed this and didn't try to correct it. 4 envelopes. He opened the first. Read it in silence while Nora and Dex waited, and Father Doyle looked out the window at his garden. Then he put it down. Looked at the wall. A long moment, Nora reached across and picked it up. She read it, then read it again. The way you reread something when you're hoping the second reading will have different content than the first. It didn't. The letter was in his mother's handwriting, the loop at the top of every A, the R that leaned right, and it explained the leaving, the documents she'd found. Walter Briggs. The threat that arrived within 72 hours of her, confirming what she'd seen. The night she left Boston with her coat, and the understanding that returning was not an option available to her. Cole opened the second letter, read it, then he watched Nora read it. He watched her face with the careful attention of a man who already knows what the letter says and is watching the moment when someone else finds out. Her eyes stopped moving. Went back. Reread a line, stopped again. She set the letter on Father Doyle's desk, looked at her hands. Then at Cole, my parents, she said, the words coming out just above a whisper. James and Helen Hayes, yes, they're in this letter, yes. Cole held her gaze. They were in a meeting they had no reason to be in. Spring of 1999. They saw Frank give an order directly. Heard something they were never supposed to hear, a pause. Frank found out they'd been there. Nora's face did something complicated, then went very still. He had them killed, yes, and your mother knew. She tried to warn them. She was one day late. He kept his voice steady because one of them needed to be, and she was holding a letter about her parents. She found you before anyone else did. She got you to June, and then she ran. The room was completely quiet. Outside the window, a bird landed on one of the tomato cages, considered the situation. Left, she saved me, Nora said. Yes, instead of saving herself, she did both. She got you safe and she kept running. Both things. Nora looked at the letter on the desk, at the handwriting of a woman she had never met who had made a decision in the spring of 1999 that had determined the entire shape of Nora's existence. Quietly, without being asked, without expecting recognition, Father Doyle sat with his hands folded on the desk and said nothing. The grace of someone who knows when presence is the only thing required. June knew, Nora said slowly, the whole time, where I came from. Why? She kept it from me because knowing could get you killed, Cole said. As long as Frank was active, as long as the people protecting him were active, information about you was leverage. June understood that. Nora sat with that, working through it, not panicking, not unraveling, just the deep, methodical processing of a person incorporating something enormous into an existing structure without letting the structure fail. Okay, she said finally. Just that single word. Father Doyle poured more tea. Nobody had asked for it. Nobody objected. Cole opened the third letter. Read it, Kansas City, he said. There's an accountant there, 79 years old. He's been in memory care for 2 years. He saw everything from the inside. He agreed to testify once and was discouraged from pursuing that. Cole looked at Father Doyle. She says he's the one person who can confirm the whole picture. From both sides of the money, tonight or tomorrow, Dex said from the doorway. Cole looked at Nora. She looked back, clear-eyed. Whatever she'd just absorbed had been absorbed, processed, filed. The weight of it visible in her shoulders but not stopping her. Tonight, she said. They left Father Doyle with his letters and his garden and the specific piece of a man who has kept a promise for 20 years and can now set it down. The silence on the road was different, not heavier exactly, denser, more layered. The kind of silence that accumulates between people who have just learned something together that changes the geometry of how they're sitting next to each other. What they owe each other now. What they're carrying in common. Cole drove the first shift. Dex navigated. Nora sat in the back with the cookbook on her lap and watched Georgia go dark around them. Past Atlanta blazing and indifferent. Past Chattanooga where the mountains appeared briefly and then retreated. Into Tennessee where the highway opened up and the stars appeared in the kind of density you never saw from a city. Cole pulled over at a rest stop around midnight, got out, stewed in the Tennessee cold. The serious cold of a night that had opinions about the people standing in it. He put his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the sky and thought about Frank. About every meeting Frank had attended. Every decision he'd been part of. Every time Dominic Mancini had looked across a table at his brother and seen what he thought was loyalty. Had been looking at it wrong the entire time. And his father had never known, had died not knowing, which was the part that had the specific weight that nothing else quite had. Not Frank's betrayal, not the money, not even his mother's 25 years of running. It was that Dominic Mancini had died believing his wife had chosen to leave him. Had spent the last years of his life carrying that wound in silence, and Frank had been there, every Sunday dinner. Standing closest at the funeral, Cole pressed his fists against the cold roof of the car, breathed the door behind him, footsteps on the gravel. Not Dex's heavy tread. Nora stood beside him, 3 feet away. That respectful, deliberate distance. You're thinking about your father, she said. Yes, whether he knew, whether he spent his last decade thinking she'd chosen to leave him. Thinking it was a choice she made about him, Cole looked at the stars. That's its own kind of cruelty. To let a man believe that, Nora was quiet for a moment. My parents didn't know anything was coming, she said. They were in the wrong room at the wrong time. That's the whole story. No warning, no reason. Just proximity to something they had no part in creating. She pulled her jacket tighter. I used to need there to be a lesson in it. Kids need causality. They need the story to make sense so they can live in the world. She paused. It took me a long time to understand that sometimes there isn't one. Sometimes things happen to people who didn't deserve them, and there's no moral to extract. Just what's left afterward. Cole looked at her. And what do you do with that? He said. You stop looking for the lesson. You start looking at what remains. She glanced at him sideways. Brief. In my case, a cookbook. A language I taught myself because a dead woman's letters were written in it. And apparently a habit of saying a particular thing about calendula to strangers in restaurants. Cole almost smiled. Almost. She put you with June deliberately, he said. She knew June. She trusted her specifically. With your life. I know that now. She must have known her well. Better than I understood. Nora was quiet a moment. I found something in the margin of the cookbook, tucked into the back cover. A note in different handwriting than the rest. She paused. It says, take care of the girl the way I would have taken care of her if the world had been kinder. Signed with an A. Cole exhaled. His mother had written a note to June about the child she was leaving in June's care, and had lived in that cookbook for 25 years. And Nora had grown up in a house with that woman, with that note, being taken care of exactly as requested, by someone who never explained why. Impossible, and completely, precisely true. She knew the trail might survive, Cole said. She planned for it to survive. She built it specifically to lead here. Through me, Nora said. Which means she trusted that I would end up somewhere you'd be. That June would keep the book. That I'd keep the Italian. That something would eventually connect. A pause. That's a long bet on a lot of moving parts. She was patient, Cole said. And she chose the right people. Dex appeared at the edge of the rest stop, placed 2 coffees on the car roof without ceremony, and retreated. Cole picked up a cup. Before Kansas City, Nora said, I need to ask you something. Yes. What are you going to do with all of this? When you have everything, he looked at her. Brown eyes, the same steadiness she'd used in the restaurant, in the apartment. In every room they'd been in together over the past days. I'm going to end it, he said. Correctly. Federal. Documented. Witnessed. Through channels that don't disappear when the people involved disappear. That will cost you. Inside your own house? Yes. People who've been loyal to Frank? Yes. And you've made peace with that. Cole thought about his mother. 25 years of kitchens with her back to the wall. 4 letters given to a priest. A recipe entrusted to a woman who entrusted it to a child. 25 years of faith that if she built the trail carefully enough, if she chose the right people, if she was patient enough, the right person would eventually pull the right thread. I'm more than okay with it, he said. Nora looked at him for one more moment. Then she picked up the other coffee, held it toward him. Not a toast, not an offering. A gesture that acknowledged something without naming it. He touched his cup to hers. They stood in the Tennessee cold and drank bad rest stop coffee and said nothing more, which was, Cole thought, exactly the right amount. Kansas City in November, no warmth, no southern grace, no weather-beaten river character like Memphis. Kansas City was Midwestern in the specifically Midwestern way, direct, practical, the kind of place that builds things to function and maintains them while they do, and replaces them when they don't, and does not make a production of any step in that process. Cole could respect that. The memory care facility on the eastern edge of the city was clean, well-maintained. The particular combination of institutional and residential that these places attempt and occasionally achieve. The woman at the reception desk looked at Cole's face and made the specific calculation that experienced people make about unexpected visitors and decided that not asking additional questions was the correct choice. Leonard Voss. Room 14. Good days and bad days. No way to know in advance which kind any given day would be. Today was a good day. You could see it immediately. The eyes when they found you. Clear, present. The particular alertness of a mind that has decided to be fully there. The room was ordered with accountant's precision. Each object in a designated relationship to every other object. Photographs on the dresser arranged chronologically. A younger Leonard. A wife, children. The accumulated evidence of a life that had kept moving despite the weight it carried. Cole had suggested, without explaining why, that Nora sit closest, something about her face. The way she looked at people with genuine curiosity about what they were carrying. Not what they could offer, what they carried. People responded to that in ways they usually couldn't explain. She introduced them simply, looking into something from a long time ago. His name had come up as someone with particular clarity about certain events. Leonard looked at her, then at Cole. "You're Dominic's son," he said. "Yes." Something moved through the old man's face. Not quite fear, the memory of it. The shadow cast by a room he'd been in a very long time ago. "I wondered sometimes," he said, "if any of you would ever come." "We're here now," Nora said gently. Leonard looked at the window, a bird at the feeder outside. He watched it with the focused attention of someone using the watching to decide something. The arithmetic of a secret held for 21 years against the arithmetic of being 79 with nothing left to protect. The bird left, and Leonard began to talk slowly at first. The way a door opens when the hinges have been stiff for a long time. Resistance first, then release, then the movement comes easy. He confirmed the transfers, specific amounts, specific dates. He had processed some of them himself, just numbers and patterns that looked like routine internal restructuring. It was only when Ida came to him with a spreadsheet and asked him to walk through the logic that he'd understood what the patterns meant, the money going out. Consistently, over years. Into accounts that connected, through several careful layers, to an operation in Nashville, and the person authorizing it had full interior access. The kind of access that means nobody checks because the checking would feel like an insult. "I need the name," Cole said, quietly. "The way you ask for something you already know the answer to, but need to hear spoken by someone who can confirm it out loud." Leonard turned from the window. The eyes of a man who has been carrying something for 2 decades and has decided, in this small room with morning light and a bird at the feeder, to put it down. "Frank Mancini," he said. "Your uncle, he sold your father out for 11 years. And he sat at Dominic's bedside while Dominic was dying, knowing what he'd done. The room didn't change. The light didn't change. The bird came back to the feeder and ate. But something in Cole Mancini's face did something it had not done in any room, in any city, in any confrontation in his entire adult life. It crumbled. Just for a moment, just for long enough, his jaw didn't shake, his eyes didn't fill. Nothing as visible as that. Just a reorganization of everything behind the surface. A rearrangement of the interior architecture of a man who had spent 25 years building his understanding on a foundation that had just been identified as false. His father had died not knowing. His mother had run for 25 years. And Frank had been at every dinner, every funeral. Standing closest, always Nora looked away from him, toward the window, giving him the only privacy the small room allowed. Leonard watched Cole with the clear eyes of a man who has seen difficult things and understands that the appropriate response is to witness them without making them smaller than they are. Cole breathed in. Out, the bird finished and left. "Thank you," Cole said. His voice came out rougher than intended. "Thank you, Leonard." The old man nodded once. He looked at Nora. "You have his mother's eyes," he said. "Or something close to them. That particular kind of stillness. Like they've already made their peace with whatever is coming." Nora held his gaze. "I didn't know his mother," she said. "But I think she saved my life." Leonard absorbed that. Nodded slowly, something settling into place. A very old equation finding a value it had been missing. "Then good," he said. "That's good." They were in the parking lot when it happened. Cole in the back, Dex up front. Nora beside Cole with the cookbook on her knees. Cole's phone, a number he didn't recognize. Boston area code. He answered, said nothing, 3 words from the other end. Then the line closed. "He knows you're coming." Cole looked at the phone for a moment, then put it in his coat pocket. Dex, already driving, different hotel. Cash, on it. Nora looked at Cole. "Frank, someone in my house has been reporting back to him since we left Boston. He's known every city we've stopped in." He looked at the phone in his pocket, which means he knew about Walter Briggs, about Father Doyle, about Leonard Voss. "He's been trying to get ahead of us." "Yes, and he just tried." Cole looked out the window at the Kansas City parking lot. Ordinary, mid-afternoon. People coming and going with their ordinary business. "We don't go back to the hotel," he said. "We keep moving." "To where?" Nora said. Cole thought about the 4th letter. Still in his coat pocket. Still unopened. Father Doyle had handed it over with a look that communicated something specific about what the fourth letter contained. Cole had been saving it. Because some things you need to be ready for before you open them. And he hadn't been ready. He thought he might be ready now. He pulled it out, his name on the front. His mother's handwriting, the same hand that had written notes in his lunchbox when he was 12. That had signed permission slips for school trips. That had written on a refrigerator one morning in 1999, a note saying she'd gone out and would be back before dinner. Cole. Just his name. He opened it. The fourth letter was short. 3 paragraphs, the first described a place. Not by name, by feeling. Boats going out before sunrise. A lighthouse that still worked. A small town where she'd arrived 14 months ago. Where she had, for the first time in 25 years, stopped noting the location of every exit. I am tired of running, she wrote. And I think, if you've come this far, you might finally be tired enough of not knowing to come the rest of the way. The second paragraph said she'd been watching him. Not directly, through the specific kind of attention that certain people can maintain across a distance, through networks built not on power but on trust. She'd known when his father died. She'd known when Cole took over. She'd known the shape of what he'd become. I needed to know, she wrote, what kind of man the world had made you into before I could let you find me. Because I could not survive being found by the wrong version of you. Cole read that twice, sat with it. The third paragraph was 4 sentences. You came this far with a stranger instead of an army. That tells me everything I needed to know. There is a lighthouse, Cole. Come find it. Come find me. He folded the letter, put it back in his pocket, looked out the window. Nora was watching him. She's alive, he said, just above a whisper, and she's waiting. Nora said, yes, then we go, she said. Cole nodded. Started to say something to Dex. And the hotel window 3 floors up. The room their bags were in, the room they weren't currently in. Imploded inward, the glass going. A light fixture visible for half a second in the gap before the dark behind it swallowed everything. Dex had the car moving before the glass finished falling. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to 30 yards. Then 60. The hotel behind them and the Kansas City grid opening ahead and Dex navigating by instinct, right then left then right again, putting distance between them and the sound. Cole looked at Nora. She was looking at the rear window. Then she turned forward. He's not waiting anymore, she said. No, so we don't either. No, the lighthouse, she said. How far? 16 hours. Maybe 17. Then we drive. Dex was already on the highway ramp. Already driving. And Cole Mancini, who had spent 25 years being very good at burying things, at keeping things sealed, at deciding that some doors were better left closed, put his hand in his coat pocket, felt his mother's handwriting under his fingertips, and drove toward the lighthouse. They drove through the night, no music, no conversation worth preserving. Just the highway moving under them, in the dark and the hum of the engine, and the particular silence of 3 people who have recently watched a hotel window get destroyed and have decided, collectively, that processing that can wait until they are somewhere safer and further away. Dex drove the first 6 hours without being asked to stop. Cole sat in the back and watched the darkness and thought about nothing specific, which was unusual for him. He was a man who used time, who returned calls during drives, who reviewed decisions, who filled the spaces between places with the work of being someone who operated at the level he operated at. Tonight he just sat and watched Pennsylvania go by, then New York, then the slow turn northeast that happened somewhere in Connecticut and changed the quality of the air even through the windows. New England air, old, specific, the particular quality of a place that has been inhabited long enough to have an opinion about itself. He'd grown up breathing that air. Something in his chest loosened, a 1/4 inch. He didn't examine it, he just breathed. Nora fell asleep somewhere in New York. The cookbook on her lap, her hand on the cover, even in sleep. He'd noticed this every time she'd slept in the car, the hand always finding its way back to the cover. A habit so deep it ran underneath consciousness. Cole looked at her, 28 years old, parents gone at 4, June gone at 12. A life built from what remained afterward, from a cookbook and a language, and the particular quiet strength of someone who had been given, by the people around her, exactly what she would need. Without being told why, his mother had chosen her, not desperately, not randomly, with the specific deliberateness of a woman who understood that the choices you make when you're running and frightened and have one chance to do the right thing Those choices have to be your best ones. Not your easiest, your best. Ida Mancini had looked at a 4-year-old child in a burning situation and had chosen June. Had written a note in the back of a cookbook. Had built a thread that she trusted, across 25 years and every kind of difficulty, would survive. That was not luck. That was love at its highest operating altitude. Dawn came up over Rhode Island. Pink, purposeful. Dex pulled over outside Providence for gas. Brought back coffee without being asked. 3 cups, 1 for each. Nora woke when the car stopped. Looked at the cup Dex had placed beside her, then at the pink sky outside the window. Where are we, Rhode Island? How much further? 2 hours. Maybe less, she nodded. Looked at the sky with the expression of someone recalibrating their relationship with the day. You didn't sleep, she said to Cole. No, you should have. Probably. She looked at him with the specific directness she used when she was going to say something true. Are you afraid? Cole considered the question honestly. Yes, of finding her, of what comes after. Finding her is the part I've been oriented toward for 25 years. The after is the part I don't know. What 25 years looks like when you put it on a table between 2 people. What you say first. What comes next? Nora was quiet for a moment. She's been having that conversation for 25 years too, she said. In her head, every version of it. She's been preparing for it since she built the trail, a pause, which means she's going to be terrified when that door opens. She's prepared for every version of the conversation but the actual one. Cole looked at her. You're going to need to be the steady one, Nora said. For the first few minutes. Let her catch up to the fact that you're actually there. He nodded slowly. I can do that, I know, she said, without softening it, without irony. The statement of someone who had been watching carefully and had reached a conclusion she was confident in. Dex got back in the car. They drove north. The town was called Crescent Bay. Small enough that a stranger's face got noticed. Large enough that a quiet woman had been able to fold herself into the background of ordinary life without drawing attention. A harbor. Fishing boats that went out before anyone was awake. A main street with a bakery and a hardware store, and a library that served double duty on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and a lighthouse on the northern point, still operational. The light, turning every 12 seconds with the patient, reliable commitment of something that has been doing its job for over 100 years and sees no reason to stop. Dex parked on the main street. The bakery had been open since 4. The smell reached the sidewalk. Brown butter. Cardamom. The confident smell of a place that has been feeding people well for a long time and knows it. Cole looked at Nora. She looked at the bakery. Let me, she said. He nodded. She went in alone. Cole stood on the November sidewalk and looked at the harbor at the end of the street. The boat's still out. The water gray and serious and moving the way water moves on a cold Maine morning, like it has somewhere to be and is not interested in discussing the matter. The lighthouse on the point doing its quiet work. There, that one. He didn't need to check against the letter's description. Something in his chest recognized it, the specific shape of it against the morning sky, the rhythm of the light. 12 seconds. Patient. 12 seconds again. Nora came out of the bakery with 2 paper bags and the information. Anchor Lane, she said. 4 streets back from the harbor. She come on Tuesdays for the sourdough. Keeps to herself mostly, she handed him one of the bags. But she helped repaint the back room last spring. Apparently she's good with her hands. Cole looked at the bag. Inside, a small sourdough loaf. He hadn't asked. It seemed right, let's go, he said, Anged Lane. A row of small cottages in the faded colors of things that have spent years next to the ocean and have arrived at a settlement with the weather. Blue gone soft, green gone gray. Yellow gone the particular pale of sea-worn timber that has decided it's comfortable with what it's become. Number 7 window box. Rosemary. Time, and at the far end of the box, spilling over the edge and onto the sill in the cold November air, the feathery orange-yellow of dried calendula flowers. Cole stopped walking. He stopped. He stopped completely, Dex. 3 paces behind, stopped too. Nora stopped beside Cole. Looked at the window box. Looked at him. And didn't say anything, because she understood that this was a moment that didn't need words put around it. Because here was his mother's recipe. In a window box. On the front sill of a small cottage at the end of a lane on the Maine coast. Alive. Surviving the November cold. Still, she had not let go of it. All those years, all those kitchens, All those different names in different cities, and all those rooms where she sat with her back to the wall, and she had kept the calendula, had grown it wherever she was, had pressed it into cream in a slow butter sauce, and given the recipe to Rose. And Rose had given it to June, and June had given it to Nora, and Nora had walked into his restaurant on an October Tuesday and said the words back to him across a dining room. All the way back, all the way here, to this window box, to this door. Cole walked to it, knocked. The woman who opened the door was old, not old like a shock, not old like a wound. Old like a tree that has survived things the surrounding landscape hasn't. Old in the way of something with deep enough roots that time moving through it doesn't uproot it. Leaves it standing, white hair. Cut practically short. The cut of a woman who stopped performing for outside observers at some point and found the stopping to be a relief. A face that had been beautiful in the specific way of youth and had become something more interesting. Specific, weathered, the face of a person who has thought deeply and felt deeply and survived both, without becoming guarded about either. Her hands, slightly bent at the knuckles. The hands of a life spent in kitchens and at work, who had fixed gutters and repainted rooms and grown things in window boxes in every town she'd been in, long enough to grow something. Her eyes, Cole's eyes. He had never seen that from the outside before. Had never stood in front of a face that wasn't his own and recognized the identical structure of his own gaze looking back at him from it. She looked at him. Something vast moved across her face. Complicated. The expression of a woman who has rehearsed a moment for 25 years and has just discovered, in the actual moment, that no rehearsal was remotely sufficient. Cole, she said, just his name. The way she'd said it when he was 12 and she was calling him for dinner. Same voice. Older around the edges, but the same frequency, the same. He couldn't speak. He was 42 years old. He had run organizations, had sat in rooms where the most dangerous men he'd ever encountered said the most dangerous things, and had never once been the one without words. He had no words. His mother looked past him to Nora, and Ida Mancini's composure, which had been extraordinary, which had held through the door opening and through seeing her son for the first time in 25 years, simply dissolved, not dramatically. Not with noise, her eyes filled, and she pressed one hand briefly to her mouth, and then she stepped forward, past Cole, not around him, past him, and put her arms around Nora without a word spoken. And Nora, who had held herself together through a week and 5 states and a hotel window and 4 letters about her parents and everything that came before and after. Nora stopped holding herself together, completely, not with drama, not with noise. Just the specific release of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally, in this exact place, with this exact person's arms around them, understood that they are allowed to put it down. Cole stood on the doorstep of a small cottage on the Maine coast, listened to the lighthouse on the point, doing its patient 12-second work, listened to the ocean being the ocean, and watched his mother hold the child she had saved 25 years ago, and felt something in his chest. Something that had been wound tight for most of his adult life, tight enough that he'd stopped noticing it as a sensation because it had become simply the condition of being himself. Begin, very slowly, to loosen. Inside, over tea, Ida Mancini had always made tea when things were difficult. Not because it resolved anything, because it gave your hands a task while your heart caught up with events. The cottage was small and practical. 1 main room, a kitchen, a table, 2 chairs and a third that had been serving as a surface for books and had been relocated to the floor without ceremony. A shelf of journals above a narrow bed. A wood stove doing its job with quiet competence in the corner. Dex looked at the cottage, looked at Cole, understood, stationed himself outside the door without being asked. Ida talked while she poured. The way she'd always talked while her hands were occupied, half to the room, half to whatever she was thinking. The habit of a woman who had spent years with a great deal to think about and had gotten comfortable with the sound of her own voice organizing it. She had known Cole was coming since Memphis, not because of the hotel window. Before that, through a woman named Ruth, 70 years old, who had been watching the periphery of things for years on Ida's behalf. Ruth had called when Cole's car had been identified in Memphis. Ida had started packing, then stopped. Because the trail she'd built was built for this moment, and abandoning it now would mean it had been for nothing. So she had stayed and waited. and grown calendula in the window box for the first time in 20 years. Outside, where the light hit it in the morning, where it could be seen from the street, a signal to herself that she was done running. You stayed because of me, Cole said. I stayed because of who you'd become, she said, simply. Because you were on the trail, and I needed to know you'd follow it to the end. You could have contacted me, he said. At any point in 25 years, Ida looked at him over her teacup. Could I have? He thought about it. A call from a number he didn't recognize, from a dead woman. To a phone inside an organization run partly by the man who had ordered her gone, who had access to Cole's information the same way he'd had access to everything else for 40 years? No, Cole said. No, she agreed. Frank would have known within hours, and whatever you'd found would have been managed. The trail had to be something he couldn't intercept, letters held by a priest, a recipe in a cookbook. A photograph in pages stuck together with old flour. She looked at Nora. People he didn't know existed. Nora looked at her hands. My parents, she said. Yes, you knew them, briefly. Well enough, Ida's voice shifted, not breaking, but becoming careful. The way a voice becomes careful when it's navigating something that still has edges. James did accounting work for a firm that had connections to your father's operation. He didn't know the full picture. Helen didn't either. They were good people in an adjacent space, and they were in a room they had no reason to be in. And they heard something, and Frank? Frank doesn't distinguish between actual threat and potential threat. He's thorough that way. Ida looked at the harbor visible at the end of the lane. I tried to warn them. I was one day late. She looked at Nora steadily. I have been sorry for that for 25 years. I know that doesn't. It's not your fault, Nora said, quiet and firm. What happened to them is Frank's fault. Not yours. Ida held Nora's gaze. For a long moment they looked at each other. The woman who had saved the child. The child grown. Having a conversation that should have happened 25 years ago, and hadn't. Better late. Always better late than never. He found the journals after tea. After Ida and Nora had talked for an hour in the kitchen, while Cole sat at the table and listened to the Lighthouse, and thought about what came next. After Dex had been handed a bowl of something warm, without being asked for his order, and had eaten it with the expression of a man determined not to react to how good it was. 14 journals on the shelf above the bed. Cole pulled the first one. 2001 inside the cover. He read enough to understand the shape of it. The early years, the fear, the constant movement, the specific exhaustion of building something ordinary and then dismantling it before it became visible. Towns blurring into each other. The way loneliness accumulates steadily rather than dramatically, the way water rises. She wrote about Rose, Rose's stubbornness, Rose's refusal to become bitter, which Ida wrote had saved her own sanity more than once. She wrote about Nora, not by name, careful even in her private journal, but around her, the child is safe. Rose says she laughs easily. Rose says she started learning Italian on her own. I can't explain what that did to me when I heard it. And later, Rose says she's going to be extraordinary. I don't know whether it's better or worse to know that from a distance. Cole read that 3 times. Then looked across the room at Nora and Ida, moving around each other in the small kitchen, with the easy instinct of people who are new to each other, but have the same sense of where to stand. He picked up the newest journal, barely worn. Turned to the last written page, 7 weeks ago. I think he's coming. I think he's finally ready to pull the thread. I grew the calendula this year in a window box outside. First time in 20 years I haven't grown it where nobody could see it from the street. I put it where the light hits it in the morning. I think that means I'm ready too. Cole set the journal down, very slowly, with the specific movements of someone setting down something that might, if jostled, shatter. His mother had put the calendula outside 7 weeks ago. Not to signal to him, he hadn't been on the road yet. To signal to herself, telling herself she was done running. That she had decided to be findable, and he'd seen it from the street, and stopped walking, and here they were. I need to go back to Boston, Cole said, evening now. The Maine coast doing what it does in November. Going golden for exactly long enough to remind you what you've been missing. Then going dark with the efficiency of someone who has other things to attend to. I know, Ida said. Frank won't run. He's going to sit and wait to see how I handle it. He's betting I'll keep it inside the family, will you? He looked at her. No. Ida studied him. The examination of a woman who has spent 25 years developing accurate judgment about people from a distance. Federal, she said. Federal. Documented. Witnessed. Leonard Voss is ready to give a formal statement. Walter Briggs has already signed his. Father Doyle has notarized the letters. He looked at his hands. I have everything. Frank will try to discredit it. Let him try. Ida was quiet for a moment. Your father's name will be part of it, I know. It will complicate things. Dad didn't know, Cole said. He trusted Frank, and Frank used that. That's not a story that diminishes Dad. That's a story that shows exactly what Frank is. He paused. And I'm done protecting a version of the family that was already hollow at the center. Nora, at the end of the table, said, Frank's been waiting 25 years too. Waiting to see if it ever surfaced. Living with knowing it might. That's its own kind of punishment. Long before anything official, Cole thought about 4 years of performing loyalty to a man you were systematically betraying, of standing at a funeral and maintaining the expression, of passing the bread at Sunday dinners, the specific corrosion of that. Come with us, Cole said to Ida. She looked up to Boston. The federal process will need you eventually. And I'm not leaving you in a cottage on the Maine coast while Frank still has people. Ida looked at Nora. Nora looked back with the particular expression she used when she wasn't going to offer an opinion, but was going to make her position clear through the quality of her silence, which Cole had learned was a very effective position. Ida looked at the window box, at the dried calendula in the November dark. I need to pack a few things, she said. She packed light. Of course she did. 25 years of moving fast meant packing light was no longer a choice. It was the shape her body made automatically when departure was coming. One bag. The journals. And from the shelf, a small ceramic pot. A calendula plant, root ball intact, wrapped in a damp cloth. She was bringing it back. Cole watched her carry it to the car and understood without asking that this was intention. She was bringing it back to Boston, to the kitchen where the recipe had started. To the place it belonged. Dex held the door. Ida paused. Looked at the cottage. The empty window box. The lighthouse on the point doing its 12-second thing. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she got in the car. Cole got in beside her. Nora was already inside, the cookbook on her knees. Dex closed the door, got behind the wheel, and they drove south, through the Maine dark. New Hampshire, Massachusetts. The engine steady, the road certain. New England moving past the windows with the quality of attention Ida gave everything that mattered. Somewhere past Portsmouth, she put her hand over Cole's. He turned his palm up and held it. They didn't talk about 25 years. That conversation would take years to have. It would happen in installments, over dinners and phone calls and Sunday mornings. It would be imperfect and sometimes hard and necessary. But it would happen. That was enough. Nora was asleep before New Hampshire. The cookbook on her lap, her breathing even. Dex drove without speaking. And Cole Mancini, who had left Boston 7 days ago, following a thread he hadn't known he was ready to pull, sat in the back of a car bar going home, with his mother's hand in his going home. Frank Mancini did not run. Cole had factored this in. Frank was 71 years old and had spent 40 years operating from a position of complete certainty about how things worked. He was not a man who ran. Running was an admission that the situation had moved outside your control. Frank had never admitted that about anything. He came to the meeting Cole called 36th floor of a building in the financial district. Private conference room used for serious conversations for 20 years. The long table, the chairs, the harbor going gray in the November afternoon outside the windows. Cole had called it a family matter. Frank had come because refusing would have looked like something. The room was not empty. Around the table, 8 men, senior figures, men who had known Dominic Mancini, who had worked alongside Frank for decades, whose loyalty had been purchased with money and favors and the shared gravity of knowing things in common. Cole had called them all the night before. Said only that something important needed to be heard, and at the far end of the table. In a chair Frank only noticed when the door closed behind him and the room settled, sat Ida Mancini, a live present. 64 years old, white-haired, with the specific stillness of a woman who has spent 25 years deciding exactly what she wants to say when this moment arrives. Frank went very still. The kind of stillness that happens when the entire interior architecture of a life is condemned simultaneously. Cole sat at the head of the table. He didn't raise his voice. He'd learned, somewhere in the last 7 days, that the quietest version of the truth is the most devastating. That certainty doesn't need volume. He laid everything on the table, not figuratively, literally. Leonard Voss's written testimony, signed, notarized. Walter Briggs's signed statement, witnessed by 2 federal contacts. The financial records Ida had preserved across 25 years of moving, kept in waterproof packaging with the care of someone who understood these documents, were the only weapons she had. The employment records from Odette's kitchen. Father Doyle's notarized account of the letters themselves. Document after document, a paper architecture of betrayal spanning 11 years, each one placed on the table quietly, without commentary, with the patience of a man who had all day. Frank watched the documents arrive with the expression of a man watching water rise. Still calculating even now whether there was a way through, there wasn't. The men around the table read. The room changed temperature, slowly, the way rooms do when the thing being read is worse than expected. One by one they looked at Frank, and one by one something shifted in their expressions. The specific look of men who have given their loyalty to a structure and have just discovered the structure was hollow at its foundation from the beginning. Frank tried to speak 3 times. 3 different versions of a defense. Technical, precise. The approach of a man who has spent 40 years winning arguments through specificity. Cole let him finish each one, then slid the final document across the table, a federal agreement. Ida Mancini's protected witness status and a formal review of the 1999 case in exchange for full testimony. Already signed, Frank looked at it, looked at Cole. "I'm not going to hurt you," Cole said, quietly. "I'm going to let the truth do it instead." The room was silent. Frank looked at the men around the table. The appeal of a man calling in 40 years of accumulated relationship. The men looked back and gave him nothing. Frank looked at Ida. Ida looked back, with 25 years of consideration behind it. Not anger. Something colder and more final than anger. The expression of a woman who has been running from someone for a quarter century and has finally, in this room, stopped. Not because she's given up. Because there is nothing left to run from. Frank said nothing else. The arrest came on a Tuesday morning. Cole was in his kitchen when Dex called. 2 federal agents. Frank's house in Brookline. No resistance. No shouting. He had looked, according to the reporting agent, like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and who had found, in the specific moment of being found out, a relief he hadn't expected and couldn't fully account for. Cole stood in his kitchen and held the phone and looked out the window at Boston moving. Relentless. The harbor catching the November light. The bridge. The particular gray-blue of a Massachusetts morning that had decided to be beautiful despite everything. He put the phone down and went to find his mother. The dinner was Nora's idea, not a celebration. She was clear about that. Not a celebration because the broken things were not fixed by an arrest or by truth spoken aloud. They were acknowledged, named, which was different, necessary. Not the same as repaired, but an acknowledgement deserved a meal. She cooked in the kitchen of the Mancini house on Commonwealth Avenue. The same kitchen where, Cole told her, Ida had first made the recipe 30 years ago. The same cast iron pan. He'd kept it because it had always seemed like the wrong thing to discard, and he'd never examined why. Nora looked at the pan when he put it on the counter, then she began to cook. Ida sat at the kitchen table and watched Nora move through the space with the focused economy of someone who has spent years in professional kitchens and has developed the particular efficiency of a body that knows exactly where everything needs to go. She watched with the expression of someone witnessing a circle close that had been open for 25 years. Cole set the table himself. He didn't usually. He had people for most household things, but tonight it seemed important to do it himself. The plates, the glasses. A set of cloth napkins he found in a drawer that had been there since before his father died. Dex appeared in the doorway, looked at the table. Cole looked at him. Dex said nothing. Waiting, Cole pulled out a 4th chair. Dex sat down with the expression of someone working very hard to appear as though this was not a significant moment for him. He was not succeeding. Cole appreciated that very much. They ate the pasta with the slow butter sauce. The calendula, dried from the plant Ida had brought back from Maine, now sitting in a pot on the kitchen windowsill in the last of the November light. Went into the cream exactly as the recipe specified. Ida watched Nora add it, watched the pinch go in, watched the cream change. She pressed one hand briefly to the table. Just. Steady. Cole watched his mother watch Nora cook the recipe that had come back from 25 years of traveling through other people's hands. Through Rose. Through June. Through Nora. Back to this kitchen. This pan. This evening they ate without ceremony. Like people who are hungry and the food is good and the company doesn't require performance, Ida asked about June, Nora talked about her. Simply. June's stubbornness. June's cooking. June's patience in explaining things, as though she understood that understanding takes time and time was not something to ration. I listened with the complete attention she gave to things that mattered, which Cole remembered over the past 2 days was everything. She had never given partial attention to anything. It was one of the things he'd forgotten about her. One of the things coming back, she kept the book perfectly, Ida said. She kept everything, Nora said. I knew she would, a pause. That's why I chose her. The table was quiet. You chose well, Cole said. Ida looked at him, then at Nora, then back at him. Yes, she said. I did. After dinner, Ida went to the East Room. Cole had given her the East Room because she had always been awake before anyone and had always gone to wherever the morning light came in first. Some things came back without being asked. Dex disappeared into some other part of the house with the diplomatic invisibility he had perfected over 20 years of knowing when to be present and when not to be. Cole and Nora stood in the kitchen, dishes on the counter, pans soaking, calendula on the windowsill, Boston outside being Boston. Cole picked up a dish towel. Nora looked at him. You don't have to do that, I know. She turned back to the sink. He dried. She washed. The water ran. The dishes got clean. Outside, the city moved through its enormous, indifferent evening the way cities do. Lights coming on. Traffic thinning. The harbor going dark at the edges. They worked in the quiet for a while. What happens now? Nora said. Cole considered it honestly. Which was itself something new. The federal process moves. It has what it needs. The organization. I'm going to step back. It won't happen overnight. These things don't. But I'm going to start. And your mother, she's going to stay. He dried a glass slowly, as long as she wants. Which I think might be longer than either of us is expecting. She put the calendula where it could be seen, Nora said. Yes, she wasn't planning to run again. No, he set the glass on the rack. I don't think she is. Nora handed him the last dish. The pan would need more time. She already thinks you're worth it, she said. He looked at her. She's my mother. She's required to think that. She's your mother who spent 25 years in hiding and kept the door open. Who built a trail through a recipe and a photograph and an old cookbook and a child she saved and trusted to the right person. Nora looked at him steadily. She could have let you think she was gone. It would have been easier. She chose the harder version because she believed you'd be worth finding at the end of it. A pause. That's not obligation. That's faith. Cole set the last dish on the rack. Looked at the clean stack, then out the window. Boston at night. The lights of the harbor. The bridge lit against the dark water. He had looked at this city through this window for most of his life. It looked different tonight, not the city. The city was exactly the same. Something else had changed. The recipe, he said. What about it? She gave it away. To Rose. Through Rose to June. Through June to you, he looked at the windowsill. The calendula plant. Small. Surviving. The only thing she'd brought back from Maine. She gave away the one thing nobody else was supposed to know. And it's the thing that brought it all back. Nora was quiet. She planned for it, he said. She built the trail through it. Trusted it to people who would hold it. Trusted that it would survive long enough to be useful. It changed everything, Nora said. He looked at her. He said, It did. She held his gaze for a moment, then she dried her hands. Put the towel on the counter. Looked at the pan still soaking. I'll finish that tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow. Like she'd be here, Cole didn't ask. He already knew. Some things are already decided before they're said. You just haven't said them yet. He looked out the window one more time, 42 years old. Standing in a kitchen in Boston, his mother asleep 20 feet away. A woman who had walked into his restaurant 8 days ago and said 5 words in Italian and changed the entire direction of everything. Standing at his kitchen sink, his father had built something. And the thing his father built had been hollowed out from the inside by someone they both trusted. And Cole had spent 15 years maintaining the hollow version without knowing it. Now he was going to build something else. He didn't know yet exactly what, but he had a kitchen, a cast iron pan. A plant on the windowsill with dried calendula flowers that had survived 25 years of running and had finally, in this November, come home. He had a mother who had chosen, finally, to stop watching the door. And he had the specific knowledge. The kind that can only be earned through 7 days and 5 states, and a recipe that traveled through 3 pairs of hands and came back. That the things that seem unnecessary are usually the things that matter most. His mother had told him that once, standing at this stove. He hadn't known then what she meant. He understood now. He folded the dish towel, set it on the counter, looked at the calendula one more time. And for the first time in 25 years, Cole Mancini stood in his kitchen and thought about tomorrow not as something to plan for, not as something to outmaneuver, not as a threat requiring preparation, but as something he was looking forward to, simple as that, new as that, and enough.